Good evening, everyone. We continue our study in the book of Job, and we are now in chapter 29. Now, yesterday, when we finished chapter 28, it was part of a very lengthy discourse, a very lengthy explanation of how Job viewed God. Today, in chapter 29, we are about to get a glimpse of the life of Job as he knew it. And so it's coming from his mouth, his testimony, and his the way that he will relate it to us, because this would be the only time we would have an understanding beyond the chapters 1 and two's narratives. Now, again, this is part of a lengthy discourse. We have this word in English, but this word really means parable. And by parable or proverb or proverbial saying, it is to give us a way, in a metaphorical way, to describe things. And so we had said that from chapters 3 onwards, all the way to the end of this book, at least to the first 7 verses of the last chapter, it is actually narrated in a poetic fashion. And so in chapter 29, it's no different. And so we say this that, and then Job once again took up his parable, his explanation, and then he said, now what did he say? And I again bring to our attention, remember his character. He is blameless, he is upright, he is God fearing, he shuns evil. Now, this is the character that has been told to us about Job. No, Job didn't tell us his character. It was described to us in the narrative. It was also in the conversation that God saw Job this way. Now, in verse 2 onwards, we are about to discover Job's previous life. Previous means before this predicament that befell him. So, verse 2, it begins this. He looks forward or pines for the day, oh, that I were as in months gone by. And by this, we probably get a hint that a few months would have come by. And he looked for the ones before all these things happened. And what happened? It was as in the days when God watched over me. I think you can use the word when God would keep me, right? Keep me. So instead of watch over, it will be keep or guarded. So it is a time where Job sees it as his regular life. His regular life is one where it is kept by God, kept or guarded by God. And that's how Job sees it. And these were a few months ago. And he's talking about those few months before. So in verse 3, he says, when his lamp shone over my head and by his light I walked through darkness. All these are good translation. Basically, he says that he has a bright life. Now, what do you mean by bright life is that as a person walks, this, remember, this is still in a poetic narrative, and the way is bright. The way is bright. He can see where he's going. That would be the picture here. And by his light, I walked through darkness, and even though it was dark, he could still see. God was guiding him through his lamp. Verse 4. Just as I was in the days of my youth. This word youth in verse 4 may be better explained as prime. Not is not the regular word for youth, as in his prime, in his earlier days, when he was way, way better, when the protection of God was over my tent. Now, this word protection of God comes from a word counsel. And what he would say is that in those early days, when it was in his earlier days before now, that he would be by his tent. He would sit and people would come to him to consult him for counsel. So God's counsel is told to the people in his days. That's how this is being understood in verse 4. Verse 5. It was at a time when Shaddai, this is the word, when Shaddai was with me and my children were around me. Now, this is his Job's view. In his mind, he sees two things. Shaddai is no longer watching him. Shaddai seems to have gone away and let everything be in a natural course of life, a natural path that he doesn't understand why all these things are happening to him. He still had children, and this is also no more. So he's talking about that period of time. And he says that his steps, in this case, his steps were bathed in cream, and the rock poured out streams of oil for me. His path very smooth. So he could walk very smoothly. And so remember, all these are very poetic language. What was he doing before? When I went out to the gate of the city, when I took my seat in the public square. Now, these are ancient Hebrew practices. So if you have the gates of the city, and so this would be an area where Job would sit. And every time you read in the Bible, when somebody sits at the gate, right, sits at the gate, it means that he is a judge, he is a leader, he is a judge, he's a well respected elder. And so you will find this in various books, and we were talking about Boaz, right? In the story of Ruth, he would be at the gate. And so you find that this is a Hebrew or a Semitic practice where people sit at the gate to wait for others to come and consult for counsel. Verse 8. Now, verse 8c says that when the young men, these would be, how would we say this? Youth. You could say that they are youth or boys. When the boys saw me, they hid themselves because they are afraid of Job. Because Job is a righteous man. When the old man will stand up, that's a very important element. This is respect. The leaders will stop talking. Now, when you say leaders, this is the princes, if you want to call it that way. The princes, that's the Hebrew word. The chiefs, they would stop talking and they put their hands in on their mouths. It's like the mouth is gaping, right? Right? You can see the mouth gaping. And then you would find that he would put the hand over the mouth. Now, what does this mean? Is all. This is all. This is a picture that, wow, this great man has come by. And so even the leaders see Job as a great man, and great man of God, by the way. Verse 10. The voices of the prominent people were hushed and their tongues were stuck to their palates. Both of this is an A and a B. This is the picture of being stumped, speechless. That's what you would understand from verse 10, verse 11. For when an ear heard, it called me blessed. Now, this idea of blessed in verse 11, it comes from the word uh, asher, and it talks about not blessed as in happy, and calls him the happy one. And when an eye saw, it testified in support of me. The idea of support of me, uh, I guess you say it testifies of me, right? It testify of me. It affirms, right? Affirms me. Verse 11. It would vouch for me. Now, what you are reading here is that we are seeing how great Job is. Now, Job is talking about himself. And he's using poetic language to say, wow, when he walks around, everybody is really at awe. They would be stunned, they'd be speechless. This great man that words cannot describe is nearby. Verse 12. Now understand about blameless, right? Understand about blameless, upright, God fearing, and shuns evil. Now, I put this back because this is the character that we need to bear in mind. And in this character, why is Job blameless? Why is he called upright? Now, what we are about to read from verse 12 onwards describe Job as being righteous. Now, this is a very important concept that it tells us why he is righteous. So let's begin in verse 12. Because I would save. Now, this word is not save as in deliver. This one is to help escape. This is what it means, right? It helps escape, helps to save in that sense of escaping from the the cries for help. So that if somebody is uh, offending, oppressing, and so we're talking about the poor who cries for help. We're talking about, well, in this case, it's not the orphan. Now, this word here is the fatherless. Now, let me explain what's the difference here when we talk about the fatherless. the idea here of the fatherless is that there is no man to help or to defend. It is not so much that it is an orphan without a father and mother. It could be, but the emphasis is the father. Why? Because when you have no father, then you have no helper, no man to help, no man to defend. So the poor cries for help, Job goes and help. When the fatherless is needing, well, he is the helper. He stands in for the father as well. The blessing of the one who was about to perish came upon me. That's verse 13. The word about to perish is somebody who is going to die, somebody who is going to be lost. And this talks about the one who is dying, about to die, blesses Job. This is how important Job is. And I made the widow's heart sing for joy. What is the widow? That is a manless. I call manless. No man to help or defend. So now we are seeing the poor, the orphan or the fatherless, people about to die, and the widow. And so it says here in verse 14, I put on righteousness and it clothed me. My justice was like a robe and a headband. Now we need to understand what he was trying to say in verse 14. The idea of righteous, right here, it is a description of Job's character. And Job's character of righteous leads him to act in righteousness. Now, understand what is righteousness? What is right? What is right by God? So, in these few verses, what is right by God? To be blameless and upright. What do you think is right by God? To help the poor, to help the fatherless, to take care of those who are dying, to take care of the manless, the widow. And that is the righteousness of Job. It says here, my justice. Justice means he takes the role to bring justice to all these people, the poor, the fatherless, those who are dying, and the widow. Whenever there is an impropriety, whenever there is injustice, he comes around and provides justice. And so it says, my justice is a robe and a headband. So wherever he goes, he will always practice and implement justice and righteousness. Verse 15. This again is what Job says. He says, I was the eyes of those who are blind, feet to those who could not walk. This would be the ones who is invalid, who is incapable, no strength, and he became their strength. The blind and those who could not walk. I was a father to the poor, and I investigated the case which I did not know. And so he provides justice. Father to the poor provides justice. This would be the helpless as well. And so we find that Job is a person who would take the time. And it says here, investigate in verse 16, he would check to see whether the person has been treated unfairly. Right? Verse 17, I broke the jaws of the wicked and rescued the prey from his teeth. So this is an A and a B. So we're talking about the poor, the blind, the lame. It says, I broke the jaw of the wicked. This would be the evil doer who would hurt these people and rescue them from the prey. The helpless is a prey. Remember, this is all in a very poetic form, and he will go and rescue them. And so you find that Job is walking around like Superman, so to speak. And not because he has great powers, but because he's got a great heart. He knows God and he uses his wealth to defend and protect the poor, the needy, the fatherless, the widow, and the blind, the incapable, those to whom people do not care about. He does that, and so he is described as righteous before God. Now he comes back to reminisce his current condition. In verse 18, it begins a sad description of himself. He says, I said to myself, this is said to myself. Now, the English will say, I thought, which is not wrong, right? I thought to myself, I will die with my family in old age. That he would die with his family around him. And that I will multiply my days as the sand. Long life. This is Job's thoughts of his life. This is how he thought his life would be because he had such a great life. He was a great man in where he lived, and he thought it would just keep going. Verse 19, my root is spread out to the waters, and dew lies on my branch all night. He is fresh. He is growing. He has life. My glory is ever new with me. My bow is renewed in my hand, refreshed. He's unafraid, right? He's unafraid. In verse 21, to me, they means the people listened and waited, and he kept silent for my advice. This is a very interesting expression. My counsel, we read about his counsel where people will be waiting. They would listen, they wait, they keep silent. They want to hear what Job has to say. So, all in all, you can say that Job is a great man of God. He is one who fears God, right? Shuns evil. And all of this gives him the credential that what he knows about God would be great advice to the people. Verse 22, after my words, they did not speak again, and my speech dropped on them. This is so powerful, is Job's counsel. He is a wise man, one with understanding. Everybody looks up to Job. They waited for me as for the rain. They actually wait for Job. Open their mouths as for the late rain. Basically, this is their attitude to anticipate Job. Verse 24, I smiled at them when they did not believe. Now, what does that mean? And they did not look at my kindness ungraciously. And this is a problematic translation. This word is not I smiled at them. The idea here is I jest, I joke. I think that would be a better word. Uh, I I laugh lightheartedly. What does that mean? It means that Job said, if I were to crack a joke, they cannot believe that I did it. Because Job is a serious man. Every word that came out of his mouth, people would just wait and listen to what he says. So he is not a man that would trifle his words. That is what it means. The second line here in verse 24 says, they did not look at my kindness ungraciously. Uh, Basically, this is not a good translation. We could translate this way. They would not let my radiant face be diminished. Why? Because Job is their source of hope. Job is the source of encouragement. Job is the source of wisdom. Job is the source of example in life. Job is their knowledge of God. Everything about Job is so important to the people. Our last verse is verse 25. Verse 25 says, I would choose their way. I would choose their way. So he is the one who chooses. He is also the one who would sit at the head. This is at the head. Right? At the head. This word here. It is not chief, but head. The second one here is I would dwell like a king. I live as a king among the troops, and one who comforted the mourners, who consoles them. So what we can see is he is great as like a king. He is great as like a wise man. He is great as a righteous man. He does go around to help all the needy and poor. He is great because his words matter to the people, including the mourners. Now, as we come to the end of this chapter, we have gone through 24 verses of how Job reflects upon his life before his present predicament. And we can see that from his perspective, why he cannot understand his friends, because his friends are not even his peers. Far from it. They don't know God as well as Job knows God. And with this, I think we will be able to have a better understanding why Job is so insistent on finding an answer. His current perspective has been that God must have left everything and not looked at him anymore and left it to the stars or to chance for whatever is happening to him. And God is no longer paying attention to him as an individual. God must be busy with something. right? I mean, just some of the thoughts that may have come to mind because it is difficult to understand. He is this kind of a man, and he is the one that everybody respects. And now he is the one that nobody wants to come to because he is suffering and sitting on ashes with boils from foot to head. When the wife will say, "Curse God and die." When his friends keep insisting that he has done grievous sins, and yet he can turn around and says, "I am not like that." Sin to Job is a very serious affair. He is very careful. Remember in Job chapter 1, he prays to God, he offers God and seeks atonement for his children just in case they might have offended God. And so how would Job then would have done grievous wrong and that he doesn't know it? And chapter 29 tells us there is no way that he would have sinned and he doesn't know about it and that he wouldn't confess it. He is the kind of a person that has been thoroughly blessed by God because God sees him as blameless, upright, God fearing, and shuns all evil. And that people would seek his counsel, he would do what is right, and he is a righteous man. And yet, all these things had befallen him. He lost his wealth, he lost his family, he lost his health. And that's why he is asking, why? Why? So, is he entitled to ask why? I think so. Because he has not done anything wrong and he is seeking some clarity. That is why, in his experience of pain, he wished he wasn't born, which tells us how painful it is for him. Yet, in his defense in chapter 29, we can see what kind of a man Job is. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.